could already tell that this is going to bother some people, but we have to talk about Hurry Up Tomorrow. It's the new film co-written by Abel Tesfaye, better known as The Weeknd, and Trey Schultz, who directed the film. Schultz is probably best known for It Comes at Night and Waves, but this collaboration with Abel Tesfaye has drawn significant attention, unfortunately not for the best reasons. Critics and audiences seem to agree on one thing. They don't like it. Some have even labeled it the worst film of 2025 so far, and look, I get it. I understand why the reception has been so negative, but I also think it's entirely misguided. This isn't just a movie, it's a piece of art, and like all art, it's inherently subjective. What Tesfaye and Schultz have delivered might not work for everyone, but in my opinion, dismissing it outright as self-indulgent or incoherent misses the larger picture. This isn't a traditional narrative film, and it doesn't want to be. Instead, it's more of a mood piece or an extended art video, a risky, imperfect, yet fascinating dive into vulnerability, loneliness, and the struggles behind the persona of a global pop icon. And you could probably tell by the length of this video that I have a lot to say about it. Not all of it's going to be glowing praise, I promise you that. But I do think there is a lot to talk about here, so let's dive into it. The film centers on Tesfaye playing a version of himself, Abel, aka The Weeknd. We meet him in the wake of a devastating breakup, introduced via a voicemail from his ex-girlfriend. He's a man spiraling, substance abuse, alcohol, and an overwhelming sense of loneliness plague him. Enter Jenna Ortega's character, a young woman fleeing her Midwestern life to find something new in Los Angeles. Their paths cross when she attends one of Abel's concerts and meets him backstage. Without spoiling too much, Ortega's character kidnaps Abel, forcing him to confront his demons head on. Now that premise alone is pretty divisive. It's loose and it's unconventional, with the narrative taking a backseat to the film's atmosphere, themes, and raw emotion. The first real conversation between characters doesn't really happen until like 30 minutes in. Before that, the movie just bombards you with disjointed imagery. Abel crying over his ex, Ortega burning down a house, concert performances, chaotic parties, and quiet moments of isolation in a bathtub. And this fragmented approach makes it easy to see why people call this film self-indulgent. But I don't think that's entirely fair. Sure, it's easy to dismiss Hurry Up Tomorrow as a vanity project for Abel Tesfaye, a pop star making a movie where he plays himself, soundtracks his own scenes, and explores his personal struggles. But is that really self-indulgence, or is it vulnerability? Tesfaye doesn't portray himself in a flattering light. This isn't a story about how cool or successful he is. It's about his loneliness, his demons, and the facade of perfection he projects as a global superstar. There's a key scene in the film where Jenna Ortega's character talks about his music, calling it glossy pop with deeper, darker truths hiding beneath the surface. And that feels intentional, almost a self-aware nod to Abel's public persona. That said, the film does struggle to commit fully to these ideas. It's like Tesfaye and Schultz want to say something profound but can't quite decide how to say it. The result is a movie that feels raw and unfinished, but not without merit. But it just feels like it's worth calling out this knee-jerk dismissal that some people have for this film simply because it's labeled as a vanity project. I mean, can any of us honestly say that if we had the resources and the platform of someone like The Weeknd, we wouldn't fund personal stories that explore our own flaws and inner struggles? And I mean, let's look at the greats. Bob Fosse made All That Jazz, and it's practically a cinematic self-portrait, and it's a masterpiece. Introspective, self-reflective films have been a cornerstone of cinema for decades. So why is it suddenly controversial when Abel steps into the writer's chair? I think much of the harsh reaction says more about the preconceived notions and baggage that viewers are bringing into the theater than about the film itself standing on its own. Now, granted, it might feel trickier here because Abel is playing a version of himself, blurring the line between the artist and the art. But just like Bob Fosse, he doesn't seem interested in presenting a flattering image. If anything, this portrayal leans into the unflattering, inviting us to reckon with the layers of ego, insecurity, and humanity. It's a bold, creative risk, and one that I personally think deserves more credit than it's getting. But now, here's the thing. This is a story we've heard before. The tortured artist who has it all but feels empty inside. The loneliness of fame. The idea that celebrities are just like us underneath the glitz and the glamour. It's not groundbreaking material, and for many, it feels tired. I get that. It's hard to sympathize with stories about the rich and famous, especially when they're being told by the rich and famous themselves. We've been inundated with eat the rich narratives lately, so when someone like Tesfaye steps forward and says, hey, my life isn't as perfect as it seems, it's easy to roll your eyes. And that eye roll might also extend to the drawn-out scenes of Barry Keoghan hyping up Abel as a superstar, gesturing to a crowded amphitheater and saying, listen to them, they love you, you're like a god to them. Now, where someone could see something like that and see Abel's massive ego shining through, someone could just as easily see the very human pressure to please everyone at the cost of your own sanity and health. And that just kind of goes to show that there are ways to read this film that get kind of covered up by the veneer of stardom at the center of it all. Barry Keoghan and Jenna Ortega, through my reading of the film, are meant to act as representations of two opposing forces for a person like Abel, the ego and the guilt. Barry props him up, and Jenna forces him to confront the darkest parts of himself. And it's weird to me that Jenna is ostensibly a representation, a manifestation, and yet she's depicted as having this vague backstory that doesn't really go anywhere or get much explanation. But during the back half of this film, where she forces Abel to be honest with himself, it's meant to represent a come-to-Jesus moment, an epiphany and catharsis. Do I think the film is successful in achieving this? Not really. Across the board, I would say that the narrative and emotional story of the film is where it flatlines. But what makes Hurry Up Tomorrow different, and worth defending in my opinion, is in its execution. And this is where Trey Edward Schultz comes into the picture. To me, he's one of the most underappreciated up-and-coming auteurs of his generation, a filmmaker with a singular vision that deserves to be discussed alongside talents like Ari Aster, Ryan Coogler, Greta Gerwig, the Safdie brothers, Robert Eggers, Emerald Fennell, Sean Baker, and Jordan Peele. And yet, Schultz often feels absent from the conversation. Perhaps it's because of his long gaps between projects. Waves left audiences stunned in 2019, and it wasn't until this year that he delivered something new. But watching Hurry Up Tomorrow reminds me why Schultz stands out. He has a style and emotional depth that's rare in today's cinematic landscape. While so much of modern filmmaking feels like it's trapped in a cycle of sameness, every action movie is a John Wick knockoff, every Russo brothers project is a generic blur, Schultz creates films that linger. His work is undeniably his own, filled with visual motifs and emotional intensity that make his stories unforgettable. Take the rotating 360-degree camera inside of a car, for instance, a recurring visual trick that shows up in Waves and in this. Spike Lee has his famous dolly shots, and Schultz has his 360-degree car shots. These kinds of bold, deliberate choices set Schultz apart in an industry increasingly driven by algorithms and safe bets. Now, back when I saw Waves in 2019, it was like experiencing an emotional gut punch, a film so raw and visually striking that it stood out to me as one of the best of 2019. And that same clarity of vision is on display in Hurry Up Tomorrow. However, like I said earlier, the narrative and emotional resonance is not as present here. But Hurry Up Tomorrow is undoubtedly, certainly, an experience. It's messy, visceral, and unpredictable in all the right ways. At times, it feels like watching a fever dream, or maybe a nightmare. The surreal visuals, erratic pacing, raw emotions mirror the film's central themes, the chaos of heartbreak, addiction, and self-destruction. I just feel like in a world of cookie-cutter cinema, Schultz is a filmmaker who's unafraid to take risks, to make something personal, and to embrace the messiness of the human experience. That's what makes Hurry Up Tomorrow worth celebrating, even if just a little bit. Not just as a film, but as a bold statement from a director who refuses to play it safe. And honestly, all of the hate for this movie makes me wonder, what do we even want from cinema? We say that we're tired of endless sequels and reboots, that we crave originality and boldness, that we long for films that challenge us or show us something unexpected. But then a film like Hurry Up Tomorrow comes along, a movie that's messy, yeah, but also alive with ambition and an unapologetic willingness to take risks, and we dismiss it outright. It's as if the very daring that we claim to value makes us uncomfortable when it's right in front of us. Films like this aren't meant to be polished crowd pleasers. They're meant to provoke, to spark something in us, even if that spark isn't always pleasant. And isn't that what taking risks in art is all about? To embrace the possibility of failure because the alternative, playing it safe, is far worse. But you know what? Maybe the issue isn't with the film itself. Maybe it's with us. We like saying that we want risk and creativity, but when the time comes to engage with something that truly colors outside the lines, we hesitate. We nitpick. We resist. It's as though we've conditioned ourselves to expect boldness in cinema, but only on our terms, only if it still fits into a neat, palatable package. And that's the real tragedy, isn't it? Not that films like Hurry Up Tomorrow don't succeed, but that they so rarely get a chance to succeed because we don't meet them halfway. Instead, we demand the extraordinary and then punish it for not conforming to the ordinary. I'm sorry and I'm not sorry for beating this dead horse, but I really get taken with this idea that we claim to want originality and risk-taking in cinema, and then see to it that a movie like this gets lambasted upon its release. When we do these things, we send a message to the powers that be that, hey, we actually don't want this, so don't try it again. The very people who claim to love cinema can easily be its undoing if we don't also support the art when it's at its lowest. It's a slippery slope, and I just hope that the folks who are shitting on this film realize that. Now, does that mean that people should be propping this up as some sort of masterpiece? No. But sharing clips of Abel online and saying, this is what he calls acting, LOL, or saying things like, obviously this movie is trash, does more damage down the line for independent cinema and perpetuates this risk-averse culture that ultimately these very same people are trying to avoid. So honestly, shame on them for being so flippant in their approach to engaging with a film like Hurry Up Tomorrow. And you know, that clip that's been circling around, the shut the up scene in the movie, is an interesting little nugget of insight into our culture, the ugliest parts of our culture. There is this online propensity to knock people down, especially when that somebody is a celebrity. That scene, and Abel's performance in general, isn't that bad. In my opinion, he holds his own and actually has screen presence. I'm not really seeing the bad acting that people are so insistent is there. What I'm seeing is a mob mentality where everyone wants to glom onto this idea that The Weeknd can't act. They already have this notion in their head, so they go into this film with a fine-tooth comb looking for any ounce of nitpickability. Sure, there's a bit of what we consider overacting to his performance, but we see that happen all the time with actors that we consider to be the greats. I've seen plenty of overacting from Jack Nicholson or Nicolas Cage in insert Nicolas Cage movie. The point is that this movie has baggage attached to it that I think people are incapable of leaving at the door. My personal rule of thumb is to try to approach cinema in a vacuum. And it helps that my knowledge of The Weeknd extends only so far as his Super Bowl halftime performance, which I thought was pretty rad. And you know something? Abel joins this long lineage of musicians who have made the pivot to acting, from Ludacris to Jennifer Lopez, Elvis Presley to Ice Cube, Ice-T, Queen Latifah, even Justin Timberlake. And while these transitions are often met with curiosity, Abel seems to be facing a peculiar kind of skepticism. Perhaps it's because his persona as The Weeknd is so firmly rooted in music and mystique that audiences are hesitant to embrace him in a new role. But what sets him apart is the way he's using this transition, not as a safe bet to broaden his appeal, but as a platform to champion bold storytelling and risk-taking filmmakers like Trey Schultz. Instead of playing it safe, Abel's big screen debut, if you don't count Uncut Gems, isn't a glossy mainstream vehicle designed to maximize box office potential. Instead, it's a trippy, emotional fever dream mashup of misery and all that jazz filtered through Schultz's auteur-like flair for visuals. Sure, it's divisive, maybe even alienating to some, but that's precisely what makes it worth celebrating. It's rare to see a musician of his stature step into a project that prioritizes artistry and experimentation over commercial viability. And that choice speaks volumes about his commitment to pushing boundaries in both music and film. So look, a lot of the praise that I have for this movie is less about the movie itself and about what the movie represents. And you might be wondering why this video is called Everyone is Wrong About Hurry Up Tomorrow. And no, I'm not trying to make some sort of clickbait, but it's a reminder that art is and always has been subjective. Everyone is wrong about this film. And in a way, everyone is also kind of right. That's the beauty of something as bold and divisive as this. It doesn't fit neatly into categories, and it's not supposed to. Hurry Up Tomorrow isn't for everyone, and that's okay. It's messy, imperfect, and deeply personal, a film that dares you to meet it on its own terms. And for some, that will be frustrating, even alienating. And for others, it might feel like a raw and honest piece of filmmaking that speaks to something that they didn't know that they were missing. So is everyone wrong about Hurry Up Tomorrow? Not entirely. The criticisms are valid, but they often overlook the bigger picture. This isn't just a vanity project or a self-indulgent experiment. It's a vulnerable exploration of identity, loneliness, and the human experience filtered through a feverish, auteur-like vision. You might hate it, you might love it, but either way, I think you'll feel something. And isn't that what we ask of art in the first place, to make us feel? Whether it's admiration or frustration, Hurry Up Tomorrow refuses to be forgotten, and that, in itself, is worth celebrating. Oh, man. This was a video I was kind of dreading making, just because I know how divisive this movie is, and I know that there's going to be a lot of opinions, possibly, that come with this video. But I do look forward to hearing those opinions down in the comments. I do think that it's important for cinema lovers to be calling each other out when we maybe dip our toes into the world of cynicism, into the world of mob mentality and bandwagon hate. I don't particularly love this movie as a movie, but as a little artifact of cinema, I do think that it is indicative of something that I think that we are claiming to want, but ultimately hating when it does come to us. That is basically the point of this whole video. And hopefully you all got that. But anyway, that's going to do it for me. Those are my thoughts on Hurry Up Tomorrow. Head down to the comments and let me know what you thought of this film. I can't wait to see what that comment section is like. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel, and I will see you all next time.